going to start at Mem Aleph Amid Aleph at 41a at the Mishnah, about 10 lines from the bottom. So not the last Mishnah, but second to last Mishnah. And on Sunday we're going to do a makeup share for the two daf from 39b where we left off before Yantiv. So Mulir Hagoruf Shosen Amenu Shabbos. The conversation that we were talking about is pots being left on the stove before Shabbos and heating food on Shabbos. Now we're talking about instead of a stove, what about leaving water in a hot water urn? So there were several types of urns. It was something that's sort of like a thermos that had a chamber where you put coal in. The inner chamber kept the hot water, and the outer chamber, whether it was enveloped the entire thermos like our thermoses or only one side, it's unclear exactly what the structure was, but it was sort of like a thermos. It had coals, and that's what kept the heat and the water hot. If you've removed the coals, and so you basically cook the water with coals in the outer chamber and remove the coals, can you keep the water in the thermos on Shabbos and drink from there? So mulir, this thermos, hagoruf, if you've removed the coals, shoveled out the coals, shosen amenu b'Shabbos, you can drink from there on Shabbos. Antichi was a water chamber that was connected to a oven. So on the side of the oven, they would put water into there and heat it from the oven itself. Even if you've removed the heat source in the oven, nevertheless, you cannot drink from there. The Gemara is going to explain. So what is a mulir hagoruf? So the Gemara says, it has coals on the outer side and water on the inside. Antichi, what's the antichi? So Rabbi Amar Bekiri. Rabbi says it's a little chamber in the oven itself or on the side of the oven itself. And therefore, it really gets very hot and retains its heat because it's a part of the oven, and the oven retains its heat very well. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Amar Beidudi. No, it's actually not a part of the oven, but rather it's a part of a urn. You have a large urn that has water in one chamber and heat in the other. So Mandam Beidudi, one who says you're not allowed to use even a Beidudi, which is a urn that has coals with it, and even though you've moved the coals out, it's retaining its heat too much. Kolshken Bekiri, for sure, you can't drink out, you can't take water out of the urn that's attached to the oven. Bekiri. Amanda Bekiri, but the one who says that you're not allowed to take water from the oven attachment, Aval Beidudi, but if it's a separate urn, like there you would be allowed to drink from there, and it would not be prohibited in part of the prohibition in the Mishnah, and it would be closer to the thermos, which is permissible. Tanikavasi Rav Nachman. We have a brisa that concurs with Rav Nachman, which it tells us that it's really a separate urn that's prohibited. Antichi, that an antichi, even though that you've removed the heat source, you're not allowed to drink from it because it's either it's copper, or Rashi says in another version, the bottom part where the chamber where you keep the coals is hot enough in and of itself is a heat source. It conducts heat on its own, even if you remove the coals, and therefore it's still cooking, and you're not allowed to take water from there directly. That's the Mishnah about water, about urns. Practically, it's not really relevant to our thermoses because our thermoses are considered don't have a heat source in there. It's simply there to envelop the food, the drink or soup or whatever it is, in a way that it'll retain its heat, but it doesn't actually heat it, and therefore, as long as it was in there before Shabbos, you can use it on Shabbos. You could take the drink out of there on Shabbos. As far as our urns are don't have, they do have a heat source in there, but it doesn't have a change valve. You can't change the temperature, and therefore it would seem that it would not apply to this either. So you have a pot of hot water, and you cooked hot water, and pinuhu, that you've removed it. So the Gemara is going to wonder whether that means you remove the hot water from the pot, or you remove the pot of hot water from the stove. So you can't put cold into there. And Gemara is going to ask, what does that mean? In order for the cold water to become hot, but you are allowed to put it into it, meaning the cold water into it, or into a cup, in order so that it becomes lukewarm. So what does that mean? So Micah Omar, what's our Mishnah saying? Omar Vada Bamasna Hachikam, and this is what our Mishnah means to say. A pot, an urn, a pot of hot water, that you remove the hot water from there. Don't put a little bit of hot water into that hot pot, even though it's off the stove, it's off the flame. Nevertheless, don't put cold water in there. If it's enough that the hot water will become hot, now you're going to cook the water not directly on the stove, but by metal, by a hot pot that was heated on the stove, and so that's chame or. That's something that became hot through fire, that you heated through fire before Shabbos. So, and now that you take the hot water out, and you're putting cold water into that, what you're essentially doing is you are cooking the water that you're putting into there on Shabbos, because you're putting it into hot water.
Is there any relation to Tata Gavar, or is it like a similar concept? Or I mean,
we're not up to that yet. We're going to get to that in a moment. But right now, it's just touching hot water at a hot surface, like we saw the other day. You can't take you can't make an egg on something that's been heated from the sun. For sure, you can't make hot water. You can't heat something that was heated by fire.
I'm just wondering, the opposite.
Even if it was above.
If you have cold water and you put a little hot water into,
we'll get to that. Yeah, that's a different concept. We'll get to that in a moment. Right now, we're just talking about the metal itself has the power to heat, and that in and of itself is going to be your heat source. What you're talking about is the next version in the Gemara, which is talking about if you're pouring cold water into hot water or vice versa. But you could put in a lot of water at once, because that way it won't have time to heat the water, because you're putting in a lot of cold water, and it'll just make the cold water less cold, and it'll take away its chill, but it won't actually heat the water. So Gemara asks, okay, so then we have another issue. But it's true that in regards to cooking, you will not have necessarily cooked by pouring a lot of hot water into this empty pot. Only if you pour a little bit, you'll cook the water. But if you put a lot of water, it's essentially going to overpower the hot metal, and it'll actually just take the chill away from the cold water, but it won't actually heat it. Great. But now you're tempering the metal. You have a pot. If this is a new metal pot, what's happening is that by having heated it and then pouring cold water into it, you're completing the pot. So Gemara says, of course, if you know that this is a brand new pot, never been tempered, it's just the first use of metal, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, because that's what you're doing, completing the pot. However, the Mishnah is not talking about that case. The Mishnah is talking about a brand new pot. The Mishnah is talking about a pot that's been used already. It's not necessarily going to make it better for the pot any better than it was. It may, but it's not for sure. And as Rabbi Shimon says, if you're not intending for something, and it's not absolute that it's going to happen, then that's not a malacha. Malacha is only prohibited if it's your intention, melechas machshavas, or if it's absolutely going to happen, psikration. And here it's neither of them, because because your pot is not necessarily going to be heated, going to be tempered. Maskef lo Abaye. So Abaye challenged. Is that the wording of our Mishnah? That it's a hot water urn that you removed the water from there? No, pinu hu. You removed it, seeming the pot. Mechem shapinu ketani. Ella Abaye, rather Abaye says the wording of the Mishnah. I mean, the halacha may be correct, but the wording of the Mishnah doesn't seem right. Ella Abaye hachikama. This is what our Mishnah is saying. Hamechem shapina v'yesh b'mayim chamim. You remove the pot from the stove, and there's hot water in there. Lo yito techa mayim muatim. Don't put in a small amount of cold water. B'shvil sheyechumu, in order for it to get hot, because it actually will cook it. And that really is what Michael was talking about before, the concept of tata'a gavar. In heat, the halacha is, it's a machlek, it's a chulin, but the halacha is tata'a gavar. We say that the lower overpowers the upper, or the stationary, overpowers that which is moving. The concept being, if I have something that's hot and something that cold comes onto it, that cold is going to change the temperature of what it came onto. But the power of heat going up is going to overpower that which comes onto it, unless, as we're about to see, it comes in a greater measure than what's below it. But if it comes in a lesser degree, the power of the heat below will heat that which is above it. Now, usually, Tatagover, we say two solids, where the lower solid stays complete, and the upper solid comes and sits on it. But the truth is, halacha is the same, even if it's an upper that comes into a lower in liquid. And so in this case, if you have a pot of hot water, and you take a cup of cold water, you pour it in, that cold water will now become cooked. In other words, it'll reach temperatures above what is considered halachically cooking yad soledes bo, which we'll see, enough that it is hot enough that your hand could become burned, or you will pull back from the heat. So that's yad soledes bo, and it'll reach that temperature. So you've cooked it, and that's really the issue with turning on the hot water on Shabbos. When you take hot water out of your water heater, if you have a hot automatic, an instant hot water heater, so then for sure you're cooking the water as it comes out. But even if you have a tank of hot water, so essentially that's already been cooked. Why can't I take hot water from there, from your sink on Shabbos? And the reason is because as soon as you take out some hot water, it creates a vacuum, brings in cold water. That cold water, if you have a 30-gallon, 50-gallon, 80-gallon hot water tank, as soon as you take out some water, you automatically, and by direct action or indirect action, but by creating that vacuum, you bring in cold water into your urn, and that's into your hot water heater, and that's getting cooked right away. So that's what this Mishnah is saying, according to Abaye, that as soon as you put in a little bit of hot water into that pot of hot water, you're cooking it, even if the heating element doesn't kick on yet. So you're not actually cooking it by hot water, by heating it. Though hot water itself is going to heat the cold water that comes in. However, nevertheless, the Gemara says that the Mishnah means to say you could put in a larger amount of hot water. Kedei lahav shira. If it's only going to take away the chill and make it lukewarm, but it's not going to make it hot. And an empty pot that you removed entirely, don't put any water into it, because there you are going to, even though unintentionally you're going to temper the pot, but it tempers it, it makes it better. So if you took out hot water, don't put cold water into it. Rabbi Yehuda, and this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as opposed to earlier we said melachas machshavas hasator, that you need intent. Rabbi Yehuda holds that even without direct intent, it's prohibited, and therefore over here, even though you're not intending to temper the metal, what you're intending to do is to heat the water, and it's not going to get there. Nevertheless, you're not allowed to do it because it tempers the pot. That even though you don't intend to intend this action, nevertheless, it's prohibited. He said this is only if to make it lukewarm. But if you are you put in so much that it really is going to temper the whole pot, that's going to be prohibited. That even if you fill the entire pot, which is actually going to temper the pot, it's going to be permissible. So Gemara says, really? To fill in the full pot and temper it is going to be permissible? If Rav said such a thing, and Shmuel said such a thing, this is what he said. It means it's only if you're putting in a measure that would cool the water, that would make the water enough to cool down, to warm up, but not actually become hot. But if you put in so much that it could temper the pot, it's going to be prohibited. Even if the measure is enough that it could have temper the pot, it's going to be permissible because you're not intending for that. You're just intending to take away the chill from the cold water by putting it into a hot pot. You're filling it, so it's not actually going to heat it, and you don't care about the tempering of the pot, and you're not intending to that, so therefore it's permissible. So now we're on Mem Beis Amud Aleph, 42a. So essentially, you're saying that Shmuel follows opinion of Rabbi Shimon that a melacha she'emes chaven, any work that you're doing on Shabbos, a prohibited work that you're not intending to, is permissible. How can that be? How can you tell me that he follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, so this, we're coming to an interesting case. Case is that there's a dangerous substance in the street. You come to the street and you find branches down. You find thorns that became attached there, and they're in the walkway, something like that. Are you allowed to move it on Shabbos? And it's a muktzah. So halacha is you're allowed to, because of the danger to other people, even if you don't see anybody around. You're not obligated to remain there and protect it and tell people, be careful, there's something dangerous here. You're allowed to pick it up and move it, even though that it's a muktzah. What about if it's a coal, a hot coal? And if you move it, it's going to, you likely are either going to fan the flames or extinguish the coal. It's a piece of metal, in anything like that. So machaben gacheles shabbateches b'rshus harabim. If somebody walks by, they could get a burn. Not in a life-threatening situation. We're not talking about that you have a telephone wire down, where that's life-threatening. We're talking about somebody may get an injury, but it's not. It may get thorns, thistles. It may get a scratch. So machaben gacheles shabbateches b'rshus harabim. So Shmuel said you're allowed to, if you have a metal coal. So a metal coal means you have hot metal in the public space. You're allowed to pour cold water on it, and you're allowed to extinguish the fire, essentially the heat from that piece of metal, so that the other people not get injured. But if you have a wood coal, you cannot extinguish that, because there you're actually creating a new coal. You're creating something that you can take and put in your fireplace, and it'll be a good fuel and a good starter for your fireplace. You're creating something valuable. Now, but as we saw earlier in regards to the wick, it depends what your intent is, because you always are, it goes by what you're intending to do in order to define whether it's a malacha shetzricha legufa. If the action that you're doing, do you need its body? Such as we were talking about, if you're digging because you need a hole to hide something in the ground. And so you're digging not for the soil, not that you need loose soil, which would be the way you would dig when you're plowing to seed, where there for sure, because you're plowing to seed, you need loose soil, so you need the soil. But if you're making a hole in the ground where you need to hide something, you need this the empty space in the ground. That's a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. When you're plowing, when you're digging, you don't need the soil. You actually need the absence of it. That's going to be, according to Rabbi Shimon, not an intentional action. It's not malachas machshavas, at least one interpretation of what the meaning of the idea is. But it's ena tzricha legufa. If you don't need the action, the end result, that's not considered a malachas machshavas. That's not an intentional act, and it's not going to be chayiv according to Rabbi Shimon. Yet over here, where Shmuel says you're not allowed to extinguish a wood coal in the public sphere, since it's not a life danger or a potential life danger to anybody. It's just that there's a danger of somebody to come there. So don't extinguish it. Stand there and tell them not to touch it. Be a good a good citizen and protect people and warn people. But you can't extinguish that coal because you're creating a new coal. You're creating an end product that's valuable. However, that's not your intent. You're not going to take it. You don't want to create a coal. You want to extinguish a fire. You want the absence of the fire. You don't want the presence of a new coal. And in the previous Mishnayos, we saw that where Rabbi Yossi said this in regards to extinguishing a fire. It's only if you're trying to make a singed wick in order to be able to light a candle better. That's where there's a concern of it's malacha shetzricha legufa. You need the coal, as it were, of the wick. But over here, if you don't need it, according to Rabbi Shimon, there's no malacha. So if you tell me that Shmuel follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that malacha, you need intent, malachas machshavas asur Torah, and therefore, if it's a davar she'eina miskaven, it's something you're not intending, such as the tempering of the pot. You pour in hot water, and the pot becomes tempered, but you have no intent of that. All you're trying to do is get the cold water to room temperature or not to be so cold. So if that's all you're intending to do, Shmuel says you're allowed to do it because you can fill a pot this way because you have no intention and you don't know that it's going to even happen to temper this pot. You don't know that it's going to temper the pot, and even if it does, you don't care about it. It's not what you're intending to do. Shmuel says, like Rabbi Shimon, you're allowed to do it. Well, if he follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that malachas machshavas asur Torah, you need intention in the action you're doing. Well, why can't you? Why does he say only a metal coal, meaning a hot rod, that you're allowed to cool on Shabbos in the public sphere? Because that would be a dorabanan. Whereas the oraisa, where you're making a coal and extinguishing an actual fire, that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, even for the public safety. Why not? It's a derabanan, because midoraisa, on a Torah level, this wouldn't be prohibited because it's malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. You're not intending to make a coal. That's the question the Gemara asks, seemingly a contradiction in Shmuel of whether he follows Rabbi Shimon's opinion or not. Because if you tell me that he follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, then even a wood fire, he should be a wood-fueled fire. He should be allowed to extinguish in public in the name of public safety. So the Gemara says, well, he splits this idea of Rabbi Shimon. He follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that if you're not intending for an action at all, there he follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Look, you're not intending to temper the pot. You're not intending to dig. You're trying to pull tables and chairs. However, but where you're intending the action, you simply don't need the end result. That's a step further. where I'm actually intending to extinguish the fire. I just don't need the end product. I don't need the coal. That's a malacha shein tzricha legufa. That's one step further. Savalak Rabbi Yehuda, there he follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that it is going to be prohibited. Amar Ravina, therefore Ravina says, Hilkach, you have a thorn in a public space, which is going to be two concerns. One, if it's in a public area, you could be carrying on Shabbos. Second is you're moving a muktzah, since you have no use for this on Shabbos as a muktzah. Nevertheless, it says you're allowed to move them, but you're allowed to move it if it's in a Rishus Harabim D'Oraisa, in a Torah level public space, then you're only allowed to move it up to 4 amos, 4 cubits, and then put it down, and then pick it up and move it again, and put it down, and pick it up and move it again and put it down. So this way, you never transgress the Torah prohibition, which Shmuel says you can't do for public safety if it's not life-threatening, but you could transgress the rabbinic, or they didn't enact the rabbinic offense in that space. However, Bekarmelis, if it's in a non-Torah level public space, so you don't have a carrying issue, the Oraisa, and all you have is either carrying the Rabbanan or Muktzah, then you're allowed to just pick it up and move it as far as you need. Bekarmelis afilatuva, and Bekarmelis even a lot, you're allowed to move. Interestingly, the Rambam, in our previous conversation, the Rambam splits like Shmuel, that says, in regards to Meleches Machshavas Asur Torah, in regards to Davar She'edim Eskaven, if you're not actually intending the action to happen, there, the halacha, it follows Shmuel, it follows Rabbi Shimon. And in regards to where you intend the action, but you don't intend the outcome, you don't need the end result, which we call Davar She'ein Tzricha Legufa, Melach She'ein Tzricha Legufa. You don't need the end result. There he follows Rabbi Yehuda, where he's strict that says it is prohibited. However, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't follow the Rambam, the majority don't follow the Rambam, and that for the most part, we'll say that the halach is like Rabbi Shimon, and that it's not a Torah prohibition if you're going to not intend the end result, or you're not going to need, you don't need the end product, and therefore you could extinguish even a wood coal in the public space, according to Shulchan Aruch. Aval nosin. So the Mishnah continued. We're allowed to put hot water into cold water. Aval nosin adam chaman techtzayin v'leitzayin techachamin. Divrei Beishamai. So Beishamai says, the Brisa says that a person can put hot water into cold water, but not cold water into hot water. And Beisil says either way is going to be permissible. So the Gemara says, because this is only talking about in a cup. But if you're if it's in a bath tub, you can only put hot water into cold water, not cold water into hot water. So what's the difference between a cup or not? So now we have the concept that we talked about before of tata'a gava, of the lower, whatever is stationary or below is going to heat up the upper. However, if you're putting hot water into cold water, so there it's only going to it's not going to have enough strength to heat the water below. Rather, it's just going to take away the chill. However, if you have hot water and you're pouring some cold water into it, it's going to, even though it diminishes the heat of the water that's there already, it's still going to heat up and speed up the molecules, as it were, of the water coming in, and therefore going to heat the water that's coming in. So in a cup, where you don't actually want it to heat up too much, because then it's going to be hard to drink. And also, Rashi says that in a cup, typically a cup is not your heat source. The cup is going to be, the water in the cup is already a second vessel, a kli sheni. And as we saw in the Gemara's over Yantiv, the Kli Sheni, a second vessel, does not have the power of cooking as a Kli Rishon, the first vessel that was on the pot itself, on the stove itself. So in a cup, usually I've taken the hot water off of its heat source and poured, or taken with a ladle, but I poured into a cup. So now my cup is a second vessel. The water already begins to cool down in there because the surface of the of the cold vessel starts to diminish the temperature of the water in there. And now I'm pouring some cold water into this, so that's also going to be lesser, a less degree of hot. So in a cup, which is not the heat source itself, and I don't want it to be boiling because it's hard to drink. Therefore, it's going to be permissible. Whereas
an ambati is here. We're not talking about like a bathtub that we have in our house, in our homes. We're talking about like a merchatz where it's got heat underneath it. I'm saying zambati could also be a Kli Sheni. A bathtub is a Kli Sheni.
Perhaps we didn't get to that yet. We were talking about what's the reason with a cup.
With a cup, I get that.
Yeah, but fine. So I'm just getting it. Now he says, what about an ambati? Yeah. So ambati, but ambati, they heated the tub with the water itself in it. So that was a first level. That was the heat source itself, meaning that was a first pot. That vessel itself got heated, so the water in there never began to cool, and therefore, if you want the cold water that you're pouring in to become hot, because you want the temperature at a hot, comfortable enough for a bath or for whatever you're bathing or cleaning. So there, it's going to be prohibited, even to put hot into cold. There, cold into hot is going to be okay. There, hot, where the cold water is in the tub, and you're pouring hot water into it, that's going to be fine. But if there's hot water already there, which is a Kli Rishon, and you're going to pour cold water into it, it's going to be awesome. Now, if you're actually bathing, the truth is that we drink water much hotter than we bathe in. Bathing at 100 is really hot. Drinking water that's 100 degrees is going to be lukewarm or cold. Nevertheless, but usually that's in a Kli Sheni, and that's going to be in a Kli Rishon in its first source. Michael, what you were saying, that our bathtubs would be considered a second vessel is at least a question, because the hot water source is directly connected to the water coming out, and it's even though it wouldn't be a Kli Rishon, because our bathtubs are not heating, there's a concept of irui Kli Rishon. It's pouring directly from a Kli Rishon. So there's a nuance there. But in any case, in the
so if I poured hot soup from a pot into a tureen, then the tureen would be a Kli Rishon according to that svara.
Well, no, but whatever's in the directly there is being hit by a Kli Rishon. So the surface and what's there is being hit by Kli Rishon. So if I have cold water there, and I'm pouring the hot soup from the hot soup into the tureen, and there's already a surface of cold water there, I'm actually heating the cold water with the first vessel because I'm pouring it from a Kli Rishon. But once it's in there already in the tureen, now the tureen is a second vessel, and the soup is also a second vessel. But the initial pour would be a irui Kli Rishon poured from a first vessel. By the way, I do want to say Mazel Tov to Steve. I see he sent me a private message here that he has to get off. Sarah's and Daniel are naming their baby daughter this morning. Mazel Tov to Steve on the birth of
Mazel tov, Mazel tov. Tiskule Gala Torah Chuppah Ben Torah Mazel Tov.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Amen.
Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Oser. Rabbi Shimon says, no, you can't even pour hot water into the cold water in a bathtub. Amar Rav Nachman, halacha ke Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Rav Nachman says halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, that is strict and says you cannot pour even cold water, even hot water into cold water, even if the cold water is the under and the main. Savar Rabbi Yosef Lamemer Sefel Arei Kamati. What about a basin? It's not a cup, but it's also not the size of a tub. So even though that it in itself is a second vessel, right? Because you're not cooking in the basin, but since it's not made for drinking, it's made for washing. It may be you want it really hot, and therefore there's a concern that you may heat it more than Yatza Ledesbo, and it's going to be problematic. No, Rabbi Chia taught in a brisa that a sefel is not like an ambati. A basin is not like a bath. And this that you thought at first that it is. And Rabbi Nachman said that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. So therefore, just as a ambati, just as a bathtub would be prohibited, so too a basin. Well, then why do we need to tell you that you're not allowed to wash, as we saw in the previous Gemaras, you're not allowed to bathe on Shabbos only this way or that way, wash your hands, water that was heated before Shabbos, and so on. You have no way to do it. You can't do a bathtub. You can't even do a basin, a water basin with hot water, even if the hot water was heated before Shabbos. You can't do anything. So in what way would you be able to wash yourself? Out of a mug? And that's a Gemara question. So Gemara says, "Mi Shabbos Rabbi Shimon Asefer Kai." You think Rabbi Shimon is talking about the end? Aresha Kai. No, he's talking about the beginning. The first statement was they say you can pour cold water into hot water or hot water into cold water. And so this that in regards to drinking, this that he said that you're allowed to pour cold into hot and hot into cold. Rabbi Shimon that Rabbi Shimon Manasseh is saying in a cup you can't put cold water into hot water, even though that it's a klisheni, it's a second vessel. That's what he said is prohibited. But in regards to a basin, and it's going to be permissible. A bath, it's going to be permissible. So he said, Lema Rabbi Shimon Manasseh Dama K'Bishamai. So what you're saying essentially is that Rabbi Shimon Manasseh is following the opinion of Bishamai, who said that you cannot pour the cold water into hot water. No, what he means to say is that was never a part of the machlokas b'sham v'sila. It's not correct. They both agreed that you cannot pour cold into your hot water, regardless of whether it's a bathtub or even in your cup. I saw Rava that he wasn't concerned in a vessel or a maya. They changed the Gemara on the wording on the side. So in a second vessel, or in the water in the second vessel in a cup. That Rav Chia taught that you can pour in a jug of water into a basin, regardless of whether you're pouring hot into cold or cold into hot. Again, because they're going to overpower each other, and it's going to make it lukewarm. It's never going to really heat. One will not heat the other. When you're pouring a little bit at a time, so that little bit, if the basin is filled with hot water, the little bit may get heated. But when you're pouring a lot, and that's the way Shulchan Aruch says, you pour a lot at a time, it's not going to heat it. Tosis deals with this a little more in regards to Tata Gavar, Eloi Gavar, whether we say that the lower one will overpower if you pour a lot at a time, and that would be what's permissible. Maybe over there, maybe because it's a separate vessel, there's a break between the vessels. The reason is that you're allowed to pour, because when you're pouring a lot, it's going to overpower it, and it's not going to heat. Either one will not make it hot. It'll just make it that they become lukewarm, and it'll be permissible. Let's start the Mishnah. The bottom last line of 42b, 42a. If you take a pot directly off of the stove, whether it's an ilfus type of pot or a regular type of pot, and you take it off of the stove and it's boiling, do not put cold into it. However, you could put it into a second vessel. That means you pour your soup into a tureen. So you pour it into a bowl or into a tureen. And then you can pour cold into it because a second vessel is not going to cook. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he says that you can put, you can always put in anything besides for as to something that has vinegar, because that's going to speed up the cooking process. And the Gemara is going to talk about is Rabbi Yehuda talking about a first vessel, in the pot itself, or is he talking about in the tureen? Is he being lenient on the first opinion and says, even though you said you can't put into the pot itself that I've removed from I took my chicken soup off of the stove, it's on the counter, and I want to put something into it, I cannot put into it because it's in the initial pot. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you may, as long as you don't have vinegar or you don't have brine in there. I'm allowed to put stuff in. Or is he talking about the end and he's being strict? In other words, that we said that into once you've poured the soup into the tureen or to a bowl, you're allowed to put stuff in. He says, no, even there, I can't put it in if it has vinegar in it. Well, actually, the Brisa says it more clearly. Rabbi Yehuda says in any pot, in any type of ilfus, which is another type of pot and more like a Dutch oven, you're allowed to put in anything besides for if there is vinegar. Rabbi Yosef wanted to say that salt is like a spice, and the lirisha in b'shela, that in the first vessel it'll cook, but it will not cook in a second vessel. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said, Tani Rabbi Chia melech ena katavlin. No, Rabbi Chia taught that salt is not like a spice. That even in the second vessel it'll cook. But that disagrees with Rabbi Nachman. The Omar of Nachman, because Rabbi Nachman said, Sricha milcha bishula kebisra detura. He says that salt needs so much cooking that it needs as much cooking as bull's meat, which takes a lot to cook. Some say that Rav Yosef thought that salt is like a regular spice that you can't put into the pot itself, but you can put it into your bowl because it's in a second vessel, it won't cook. No, it's not like spices. You could even put into the pot that just came off the stove. Because Rav Nachman says that salt needs to be cooked like bull's meat needs to be cooked, so it needs a lot in order to cook it, and therefore you can put it even into the pot itself that came off the stove. You can add salt as long as it's not on the fire. You've taken the pot off the stove, you can put salt in, but other spices you can only put in once it's in your bowl or in the tureen.